Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for yet another panel. My name is LL McKinney and we're coming to you here for the Juneteenth Book Fest. It's a different world, Black secondary worlds in fantasy. And I have with me here two amazing authors who are great at writing worlds separate from our own and parallel to our own, but still their own in the midst of that. I hope that sentence made as much sense coming out of my mouth as it did in my head, but let's get right to it. Go ahead, Dhonielle.
All right. My name is Dhonielle Clayton, and I am the author of the Bells series. And I pitch it as Scott Westerfeld's Uglies meets Marie Antoinette's Court, set in a world where everyone is born looking a little strange, but there are these women called the Bells that can change you down to your bones for the right price. And so I am a fantasy head. I love all things fantasy. I grew up reading fantasy from my father's bookshelves, which are right behind me. And I'm so excited to be able to deep dive with two of my favorite writers about all things fantasy.
Thank you. And Kwame.
How's it going? My name is Kwame Mbalia. I am the author of the Tristan Strong series that you can see right behind me, which is a world in which an African-American boy gets sucked into a world where West African mythology and culture and African-American folk tales coexist, but in conflict, and Tristan has to help them bridge that conflict in order to defeat a greater evil on the horizon.
These are both series because they each have more than one book in them that I love immensely. And I do have to do a shout out real quick. My nephew is so excited to hear that there's another Tristan Strong book. This kid did a whole dance when I told him. He was so upset that it ended, but then I told him there's another one and he got so hyped. And now his brothers are reading it and his sister wants to read it next, but they ran out of copies. So they got to figure out how to share.
I'll make it rain on shorties. I'll send them a couple copies so they don't have to fight.
They're so excited. Girl, listen, these kids, they're so excited about these books. So I want to start kind of top level and then go deeper, of course. I'm sure both of you have answered this question in some way. When you start with your stories, do you start with the characters, the world? Does one feed the other in any particular direction? Does it all just sort of coalesce together? Like, how does building this secondary world sort of happen at the offset?
For me, I always build my world first, and then I find my troublemaker. So the world of the Bells for me came out of a question. I was looking through my teenage diaries and journals, and I was real mad about I had really, really bad cystic acne, and I still battle with it. And I was very frustrated about the way people were treating me based on something I couldn't change. And I thought as an adult, what if there was a world where you could change everything about yourself? How would people behave? What choices would they make? So I found my world first. And then once I built my power structure and I built sort of my central governing principle of my secondary world fantasy, I thought, who could make the most trouble in the world? Who would be the most interesting to follow? Because when I was building my world, I thought of following a lot of different kinds of people. But I settled on following one of the people that can control what people look like, instead of someone who enjoys being changed. And I made that choice on purpose after building the world. I don't know if I could have done it the other way around. And make sure you answer these questions too, Elle. I'm just saying. You might be the moderator, but don't be playing games.
My character spends at least half the time in the real world, so I don't think I count. I'm just here to ask the questions. Okay?
No, man.
You know,
the conversation.
You talking over. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, the drag. Okay.
For me, I'm actually the complete opposite, and the way, and this is just all coming from how I write in general, which is, in a very exploratory way. half of my story will change as I go back and do revisions and as I'm writing, because I'll figure things out. I'm basically writing my way through the problems. But specifically for world building, if you've ever played video games where you haven't explored the map yet, that's how I talk about myself writing, right? You're walking and you'll look at the little overlay of the map and it's grayed out. You don't know where everything is. You don't know what you're exploring. But this character is still moving through this world and encountering things. And that's the way that I write. I write with a character, with a problem, and that problem and him trying to address it is what drives the plot forward. And so a lot of times my first drafts will be, 30, 40, 50,000 words, because I haven't fluffed it out. I haven't added and expanded upon this world. And it feels weird for me to do that if I don't know what my character is doing, right? Like if I'm like, I'm building this 8-room mansion and the character is only going to be in 2 of them. Well, why did I spend all that time on an 8-room mansion? And so for me, Tristan is running through a forest and I'm like, okay, well, what does that forest look like? And that's where I'll describe the world. And then he moves forward and Tristan has crossed a bridge and he's in this clearing. Okay, well, now what does this clearing look like? I didn't know about the clearing until I wrote about it. And so that's how I kind of build the world step by step, puzzle piece by puzzle piece, until at the end, it may look a little confusing, but that's where the magic of revision comes out and smooths it all out.
As a gamer, I really appreciate that analogy. Like,
You
I don't
saw
know if you
that?
saw, but when you said it,
You
I was
saw
like, that, okay,
Y'all are
that
doing
makes
the
a lot of
most.
sense.
Doing
No,
the
because
right now.
listen, video games are some of the best storytelling out there, and people don't give it its due,
Mhm.
in all honesty.
The last video game I played was Duck Hunt, so I would love to be upgraded. And y'all,
Listen, they released the new PS5. The pictures, they ain't told us how much it costs yet. But
You noticed that. You noticed that. They didn't drop that price tag, but it's all
I'm
good.
scared. I'm so scared. But I can kind of get a sense of where this might lie for y'all. Because I hear where I'm like, oh, I do some plotting, and then I hear, when you were talking about Kwame, how you're writing your way through the problems. So are you a pantser or a plotter? Or are you somewhere in between? And I know I've stolen the answer for this question from Dhonielle in being a headlight writer, but I'm gonna let y'all explain your process and how you approach. And it might change for every book, but still.
Dhonielle, you want to answer first, or?
You can go ahead.
Okay. For me, I've had to train myself to at least do some, like, bare minimum of planning. I get in trouble if I don't know where I'm heading to next. You mentioned headlight writer, which is, the perfect term. And for me, it's, I need at least guideposts, right? I need mile markers. Even if I'm, the highway is going this way and that way, I still at least need to know where I end up. And so what I'll do is, I actually just tweeted about it, is I'll have the opening scene or the opening part of the scene and where I want it to end up. And that's it. And then I just write towards that ending. A lot of times, it might not make sense in the beginning and I'll have to go back and revise it. A lot of times I'll discover things, subplots, new characters that will add material for the later book as I'm doing that. I've tried to outline and it loses the excitement for me. Like, I can't, when I know what's going to happen, when I know that everything is mapped out, I'm like, well, why am I writing the book? I know what's happening.
I feel the same way as Kwame, and it's so great because we collaborate, and it's, I need like 6 things, right? Headlights writer. I can only see as far as the headlights in the dark, and the dark wood and the dark road is the book. If I can see the end post, I'm bored. And I argue with another one of my close writing friends, Victoria Schwab, about this all the time, because she can't start a book unless she knows the ending. And if she knows the ending on the road, then she can go back to the beginning and do her exits along the road. And for me, I don't know my endings, and I only know about 6 things at a time. So I figure out those 6 things, I write those 6 things, then I go back to the beginning and I read, and I'm like, okay. Then I think of 6 more things. Then I go back to, and I write them, and I go back to the beginning. And I read through and I'm like, okay, we're cooking. 6 more, right? And then I make my way all the way to the end so that, because I think I'm a nervous writer, I probably don't trust myself, and I need and feel like I always have to go back and taste. It's like my mom always talks about how I taste my food too much as I'm cooking because I'm nervous, and it's like, just let it cook. But I'm that person, I got my nose in the pot, I'm looking in the oven, I always have to go back and make sure it's right. And I just 6 beats at a time. That's all I really want to work on, because you're right, Kwame, you lose the magic. You really do. You lose the magic when I think you know too much.
I'm honestly the same way. So I completely understand. Like, if I know what's going to happen, I get bored, and then I don't want to be bothered,
and then I can't surprise myself, right? Then you can't surprise yourself.
That's one of the best parts, is surprising yourself. Did y'all surprise yourselves with these books? Like, were there stuff that happened and you didn't know it or didn't plan it, and then you were like, oh, okay? Or, on the flip side of that, kind of, is like, you come up against like a roadblock and you don't know, how you're going to get around it, because maybe you don't have the whole map just yet. And you're like, yo, I'll come back to that. And then you get to some point later and something happens and it fixes the thing that you didn't know how to get past. Like, have you ever had those experiences with your method of world building?
That happens to me a lot, where I think I've left my own breadcrumbs or little seeds that I'm not paying attention to. And then I just need to go back and pick them back up and make sure they connect. And something that I figured out when writing The Bells was I was trying to figure out why, right? What, like, getting the internal consistency of the world, building the mythology. And I had to stop midway through and say, my reader's going to ask, why do my bells believe? What have they been told about their powers, about why they are these divine beings sent, that have this responsibility? So I had to go back and build the myth, right? And think through, what do we tell people in order to enslave them? So then I went to history and I said, okay, let me look at what they told Black people about their enslaved status, right? To keep them enslaved. And I thought through and I looked at all these historical documents and I said, bingo, I need to build a meta-narrative and a mythology that is literally internalized by everyone, to say, this is why the bells have this purpose. It's passed off as divine and is beautiful in my world, but underneath that beauty is a whole bunch of ugly. But I had to go back through and say, okay, biblically, these things were said. How do I create a mythology in a polytheistic sort of world to explain the why? But I couldn't explain it at the beginning of the book. I had to get halfway through before I figured that out.
Yeah, for me, it's more of leaving, leaving outlines or leaving templates, leaving generic plot devices or characters, and moving past that so I'm not stuck on it. So for example, in the last, each with Tristan 1 and Tristan 2, like at the last moment, right before I've turned it in, I've read something or seen something and I'm like, that would be perfect. That's what was missing. That would add this extra dimension. In Tristan 1, it was this idea of the Ma'afa. Like that came, I think, about 2 to 3 weeks right before I turned that book in. I was reading Zora Neale Hurston's book, Barracoon. And at the back, they were talking about the Ma'afa, which is this the lingering malaise of everything that we've been through, from slavery to the way that we've been treated and so on and so forth. And I was like, that concept would be the perfect villain or overarching evil in this book. Like it wants nothing, it exists and it's evil. And then the representation of it, I was like, well, what kind of beast, what kind of creature would best represent that? And this idea of this giant, ancient, rotted slave ship, I saw when I was in the museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. The very first level that you enter into, they have the beams of this slave ship that they found, and it's on display there. And I'm like, that's the perfect villain. And so now I go in there and I have this cardboard cutout, it's okay. This I called it a destroyer character in there. And you take out the destroyer, you replace it with the Ma'afa, and that is something that it's more specific, it's more tangible, it's more concrete, it's more, it looms over the book more than just this generic thing. And that's what happens with me a lot when I'm doing my writing, is that I leave these spaces that I can expand upon later if I want to, or if I have the time to, or if I even have to come back in another later revision. The book is complete with those cardboard cutouts, but it's not great with those cardboard cutouts.
And that's what makes quarantine really hard, because I remember when you were at that museum, because you texted me a picture and you just said, boom. And that's like it. Like, that's all Kwame said. He was like, got it. And it's hard with quarantine because I'm waiting for those moments too, right? I need to be able to go to museums and to walk around and explore in order to fix and sort through all of the issues that I'm having in my work and get those Eureka moments. Because that happens for me too, where I'm like, that's it. I remember being in a museum and seeing these weird coins, and they were coins that they used in ancient Greece that prostitutes had to use. They had a separate currency that if you wanted to visit a brothel, you had to turn in your regular currency for special coins that the prostitutes, the women, would only accept. And I thought, bingo, there's my beauty economy right there. When I saw those coins, I was 75% through that book. And I was like, this is what it is right here, that they would have a separate currency to control and regulate this industry. And it's things like that where you need to be able to put things into your mix as you're writing, that if you have an outline where it's sort of, you don't get those moments.
See, that perfectly sort of segues into the next question that I had. And I'm going to ask it differently for each of you, because you each write your worlds so specifically. Kwame, for you, it's, you have, you start off in the real world, right? But we spend 90% of the time in this other world that itself almost feels like two separate worlds, but Tristan's there to, bridge that gap, to bring them together. And at the same time, that world is filled with influences from this one as well. I think you both have influences from them, but like specifically, you see like Brer Rabbit and Fam and all them, and Anansi, and who do exist here, as much as they do there. So what was that process like with saying, this is how much of this world I'm going to put into this other world, and how much room did you give that other world to then sort of grow from the seeds you had planted to become its own separate thing, to add to the lore, instead of trying to be like, this replaces it in any way?
I mean, that's an interesting question, because a lot of, at least in my opinion, a lot of fantasy is influenced by our world, right? Like we take geography, we take events, we change them, we manipulate them, but you still see the outlines or the underlying narrative of our world in this fantasy world. Whether it's the War of the Roses or whatever in Game of Thrones, or whether it's African American, the Mid-Atlantic slave trade, and Tristan. For me, I can't help but put these aspects in this world. Some things are like, I feel like I'm obliged to do it. I have to do it. For example, the thicket, where they're the hideout and the refugees are staying. Like you can't have Brer Rabbit and not put the thicket into the story. And then some other portions of it, for example, when you talk about the rich folk, when you talk about Isilangu, like I was researching South Africa, and there is a mountain stretch called, I'm looking at the map right now, it's on the wall behind my computer. There is a mountain stretch that runs through South Africa and out of it. It's called the Drakensberg mountain range. That's its exonym. I forgot what the endonym, exonym being the name that outside settlers and colonizers gave it when they arrived. The endonym being, you know, what the people who live there actually call it. And I wish I forgot what the endonym is. But the Drakensberg mountain range is this giant sheer face, you know, that rises above clouds and rises above the mist. And it looks like just a giant wall that is blocking off the rest of Africa from this coast, from the Cape Coast, from South Africa. And so I'm doing this research and I'm like, that is perfect for where these people, these rich folk, have isolated themselves to protect themselves from these iron monsters. And so a lot of times it's just, you know, things that I feel like I have to put in there and things that, you know, strike me as, how could I not put it in there? You know, these visual features, designing Anansi's lair, you know, where, you know, his palace. I've never seen any reference to Anansi having a palace in any literature. It's always, you know, he just has a home. It's a normal home. And so when I'm designing and when I'm thinking of Anansi's palace, it's like, well, how does Anansi live? You know, how does a spider god, a trickster god, what is his lair like? And so designing that was just, took, you know, some creative, you know, interpretation, extrapolating, you know, what we know about Anansi, what the tales say, what he would like to do, what's obvious and what's not so obvious. And so that part, it's like, that's fun. That's the creative, you know, ingenuitive part of being a writer that, you know, I enjoy.
I will say that I really enjoyed in reading that. And I know it was Lil Man's, his favorite as well, was because he has drawn pictures of like the bone ships.
I haven't seen the pictures. Where are the pictures?
Well, okay, I will have my sister send me the pictures.
Send me the pictures. What are we doing? What are we doing?
I haven't seen the
Drag
pictures.
her, Kwame, drag her!
Well, because my sister just like took, and they weren't really good. Like if I would have been taking them, I would post, like take them. I'm gonna post these online, but she was just like, look at what your nephew was doing. And he's like half trying to hide it. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to have her take me some good pictures of it. But he did like the bone ships was his favorite, because he's really into dinosaurs, right? And fossils and that type of thing. And he was like, how is water on fire? Like he didn't. It was the best thing. But just looking at, like, hearing you describe how you go about, you know, you're like, this actual part of this place is now, it's perfect. So that was like, I'm like, I need to go out and look around physically for things and put them in my mouth and see how that works out. Dhonielle, the way I'm going to phrase the question is, because yours is based off of, you went back and you did the research for slavery and how do you put this narrative in there, but you also are critiquing an entire industry that exists right now and what it was telling you as a girl, as a young Black girl, especially, because a lot of this is a critique on the beauty industry as well. And you took something super synthetic and built a fantasy out of it. Sorry, my cat is upset that he's not allowed in here and he is slamming into the door at this point.
Because you're a hater. Jester is supposed to be part of the
I need you to stop taking his side in these things, okay? He can tell. But what was it? It's a really basic question. Like, how did you build out of this industry and make it into a fantastical, like, magic system? Like, what parts did you pull specifically, if you pulled anything specifically? Because it's not based on, I mean, it is based on lore, but a lot of it is from, you know, your personal interactions with beauty and beauty standards.
What I was thinking through when I said, okay, I want to do, make a world where you can change yourself to your bones and talk about beauty. I then went and said, okay, what cultures created the beauty industry, right? So I looked through products and I went and I researched the history of beauty products, the history of makeup, and looked at the history of sort of clothing, right? And I zeroed in on big industries that really centralized from ancient Egypt in terms of lining, using coal and all of these processes that they use to beautify themselves and their bodies, waxing, all the way to the Greeks then I was looking at the French, and the French really commercialized a lot of the beauty products that we see now, and then the Japanese, and Korea. So I was looking and sort of tracing these huge markets and thinking about, okay, who influences when I go into Target and I see all these beauty products, how do we get here to putting these creams in these bottles with these promises, right? Why, when I'm 16, was I so excited at the scent of going into Macy's and the beauty counter and seeing all of these things? Like, how did that happen? So I just reverse engineered and did a lot of research on the beauty industry and what cultures were responsible, right? And then I looked at cultural appropriation, and I looked at, there are these great videos of different beauty trends through the different decades. I watched a lot of those and how they switched, and I looked at sort of, what were Black women doing at the time? And how did the beauty trends trickle down to them? And I just created a whole mix, right? And I used to live in Japan. And what I found interesting about living in Japan is that everyone wanted, when I was in Tokyo, it's really big on like, how do I make myself look cool and interesting? Tokyo street fashion is fascinating. And I used to see a lot of people with wearing sort of dark makeup and like having dreadlocks and braids. And that's when I saw the Black people in Tokyo, because they were doing braids, and sort of Nigerians were importing Black American cultural iconography there. And I just thought, this is interesting to me. But rather than write a book set in our world where we can't really have honest conversations about how I feel like a lot of people want to look like Black women, but don't want to be Black women, I thought, let's put it in a fantasy world. Let's extrapolate it outside of our world so we could actually talk about bodies and beauty and hair and all of those things without getting trapped in a lot of the things that prevent having these conversations. And so I just made a whole mix. I said, okay, I lived in Japan. I'm going to take a little bit of that. I'm going to take a little bit of France, and I'm going to take a little bit of New Orleans antebellum sort of blood quantum politics, and put it all together, because my family is from that area of the country. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna mix this all up so we can have a conversation. But at the core, it really is just asking a question about, does the way that you look determine how much power you have? And what if that power is divided into parts, and sizing up your hair texture, your eye color, your skin tone, your body type, and so on and so forth, so that we can really, like, I have price lists in the book to sort of talk about like each piece of a person's body and its worth, just to open up a conversation about it. And so what's interesting too, thinking about it, because people always say, oh, asking is the bells West African or whatever. And I'm like, no, it's something else. But I wanted to have a question. I wanted to just talk in general about beauty. And so that I made the most coveted look. Everyone wants skin the color of the night sky, so they can dust themselves in glitter and look like stardust. Things like that. I wanted to subtly have a conversation about it and about beauty, coming at it from a different place, taking real world historical things, mixing them, and putting us in a secondary world.
You certainly did do that. And everything that you just mentioned were some of the things that I picked up in the book, some of them that I didn't pick up until you started talking about them. I mean, because, you know, you go back and you reread something or you rewatch something, you find different things. And of course, I was partially distracted by like all the food happening in that book. I'm just going to say, I'm sitting here like, I got to put the book down because I'm hungry now. And now
I got so much hate for that. You know that, right? I got so much hate.
Oh my God. Man, the food in that book, I could only read that book on a full stomach, or it would just upset everything.
Some lady was like, how dare you use food to describe people? And that, you know, Angie Thomas said, in The Hate You Give, that you're not supposed to use food to describe people of color or people. And I said, I'm literally.
You're doing it on purpose, right? Yeah.
Right. Like that bodies are consumed, especially female ones, like are consumed in a particular way. All of our bodies are. So, but okay, ma'am, go off. Let me know. Use one of my best friends against me. Use her work and just police me. Oh, please do.
Like we're gonna jump off on that. I mean, it is Juneteenth, so we're gonna say what we want to say. Sort of taking a bit of a left turn here, because we talked about the worlds, and I want to talk about the people who populate them. And just we'll start off with another kind of basic question: is who is your favorite to read in your book? Like, because you go back and you reread your own stuff, and sometimes it'll hit you different than when you were putting it on the page. And who was your favorite to write? And I'm gonna tell you my favorites in the book is, Camellia was my favorite just because of every time something didn't go her way, she was like, this isn't supposed to happen. But it wasn't in like a spoiled way, like old girl Sophia, who I could choke. But anyway, and then, that Gun Baby is like, I'm a Gun Baby stan.
Yep.
To the day from when she was like, did you just shush me? I was in love. That is my favorite character. So who is that for you?
It better be Gun Baby, Kwame.
Did you want to answer for me? You can. You go for it.
I'm just saying. I'm waiting to hear what.
The favorite person to read and the favorite person to write. To write, the favorite person to write is probably Gun Baby, because Gun Baby is like the outlet valve for the book. Mm-hmm. It is it can be a very depressing book. It can be a grief-laden. There are a lot of concepts and a lot of metaphors that exist just below the surface, which is I think is good because it allows the book to be consumed and read as a pure narrative device. But you can come back and break it down and have actual conversations about some of the issues that are occurring at different points or oftentimes simultaneously through the book. And so Gun Baby becomes not only this outlet valve for Tristan, but this outlet valve for the book. For Tristan, she is this character that speaks when he feels like he can't speak, who is confident when he feels like he has lost all of his confidence. She is, this opposite to Tristan, and they balance each other out, which is why, it's really perfect that they travel throughout the book together. But she also then becomes, for the book, she becomes not this, she's not comic relief, but she is someone that almost gives you permission to laugh. It's like, it's a self-drag. It is self-deprecating. Gun Baby is, someone who you want by your side, right? You want in your corner. She's that character that you don't want to face, but you want on your team, right? She's like, Gun Baby is like Charles Oakley for the Detroit Pistons. So she was definitely my favorite person to write, because if reading it can be difficult, writing it was definitely difficult. Writing about all of these different struggles, both personal, internal and external to Tristan, writing about it, it could be difficult at times. And so writing Gun Baby's scenes were a relief. Gave me the ability to take a little bit of break from some of the more heavier material. But reading the book is definitely High John. Yeah. Reading High John, who is, if not for Tristan, would be the next character who is a bridge between, the two groups of people in the book, by design. Like reading High John, reading, what he wants to do. I think an interesting exploration for me personally would be to write out what High John would do if he got his hands on the story box the way that he wanted to, right? High John is someone who has experienced the ills and the malaise of both halves, right? He has seen what has happened, and I'm speaking from the traditional character, not necessarily the one in the book, but High John is someone who, according to multiple, storytellers, was an African prince who was sold into slavery, who then existed as a Black American character. So he has experienced both sides of evil. And so what does that character do when he gets his hands on power? What sort of changes does he make? And so I think that's an interesting exploration. And every time I read, I find something different in what High John wants to do. Would he save the world? would he take it out on someone? What would happen to Alki if High John had his way and became all powerful?
I want him to be a villain, but I know that's just me because I like villains. But he has every right to be mad, Kwame. He
does.
To be mad.
Well, a villain is just someone who is a hero in his own story. So, like, who is he the villain for? You know, like, who is is he an anti-hero? Is he an antagonist, or is he an actual villain? You know, that's something that I think it's interesting and is worth exploring in the future.
I remember reading bits with High John in it, and every time, I'm reading it, in the back of my head, I'm replaying that scene from American Gods with Orlando Jones. And it's like, these are characters that, they're powerful in what they say and what they do. And their appearance, is that sort of, and it's just that combination speaks so much that we could have a panel on that alone.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the respect.
Right? Listen.
The respect.
It's so good. It's so good.
Mm-hmm.
Your characters, Dhonielle.
I actually love villains more than I like heroes. And so I actually loved writing my terrible ass villain, Sophia. She represents every white woman who ever terrorized me in high school, in middle school, in college, and beyond. And I was able to channel that into her. And I loved writing her because she just took her privilege and she said, I'm going to do what I want to do because I've been told I'm allowed to do it. So then what, right? Who's
going to check me?
Who's going to check me? Nobody, because this is what happens when someone is given the pedestal and it is indestructible, right? And so I loved writing her because I got to try on that exaggerated power, right? And I got to feminize it in a stereotypical way where she's not slaughtering people and, cutting people up, but she's going to make a woman have a pig nose in front of everyone and make her look hideous to belittle her. Like she does the tiny cuts that become infected before she gets bigger and bigger. Because I wanted to show how insidious and small little nasty things can be as they grow and how they can show power, right? You can be like Voldemort and kill people, right? And that can also show, oh, I'm powerful, I'm just going to murder you. Or you can slice them one slice after another until the infection becomes septic, right? So I wanted to do that a little differently. So she was great. She was great to write because I was like, I'm just going to get busy on her.
I will tell you that my best friend, she was sitting on my couch reading the story and she got to the pig nose part and she threw the book and I'm playing like Breath of the Wild and I'm like, what was that about? And she was like, I hate it. I hate her. She then went and picked it up and finished reading it, but she was so upset. So you did your thing, but go ahead. I keep interrupting you.
No, I love it. No, I loved writing her because I got to not have to check myself or even think about representation, think about nothing because she's a white coded character and I could really dig into my, like all the things that I think about power and the power that white women hold in terms of the beauty conversation and industry. And then you said the person that I love to write the most. And then
the person you love to write and the person you love to, like when you go back, that character just grabs you every time, like rereading the person you love to read.
I don't reread my work. I don't know
you
about
you don't go back and
no, because I want to change everything. When I reread my work, I'm like, oh, I would do this differently. I would do that. But I did have to listen to my audiobook in order to write a short story set in the world. So when I was doing that, I love to listen to when one of my character's sisters, she has 6 sisters, but one of them that I really love, she has a combative relationship with one. There's one that's real wild. And then she's got a couple of them that are really, really sweet. And I think I liked reading about their dynamics and sort of that group dynamic of like, you got the wild one that always checked. You got the one that's the rule follower. You've got the sort of sweet one, which is my favorite one. Her name is Valerie, named after my mother. And you've got, so I think I liked reading about the sisters the most. And if I could redo my book, every time I listen to it or even try it, I think about like, should I have told this as multiple point of view from all the different sisters? Like I just go down that rabbit hole.
You do that, yeah. No, I get it.
I get it. Yeah. I go down the rabbit hole. I'm like, I should have written this multiple point of view. It should have been all the sisters. Like, why did I do this? So.
No, I absolutely understand. I love listening to, because it sounds very much like, for both of you, the characters inform the world as much as the world informs the characters. Like with, Anansi just had a house, but here he has a palace, and who he is informs that setting. And, every part of a setting then influences the world around it, which is, I think that something that a lot of people outside of the writing process don't really, delve into. Is like, I can't just plop a castle down and call it a day. That castle interacts with the people around it and the world around it. And we're running out of time. We've got just a few minutes left. I would like, again, this could go on for forever. But let's say for the last bit of thing, what you're working on right now that you can talk about, and any advice for world building that you would impart on an aspiring writer.
Kwame can go first because he's smiling.
That is an interesting way to deduce.
Okay. Writing it. Let's start with writing advice. Writing advice that I would impart. Something that I've been trying to do myself and work on myself, as I have a new addition to the household, and time is rapidly being carved away for different items, is that I have to be intentional when I write. So it's less me sitting down and being like, okay, let's just do something. Let's just start writing. We'll pick up where we left off and see how it goes. No, I have to sit down with a goal in mind, and that, I want to write this particular piece of dialogue for this scene, or I want to introduce, there's this world building segment where my character is traveling from the train station to a meeting, several blocks away. I want to introduce the world during this journey. I have to be intentional when I write. I set a goal, and it's not about word count anymore. It's not about length and duration. It's doing that intentional piece of writing. Focus on it, and that's what you hope to accomplish. Because you can write 200,000 words, but if you're not intentional with what's happening inside of the story, it doesn't really make that much difference. You could spend 4 hours writing, but if all you get is a 500 paragraph section that you're deleting tomorrow, what have we really done? And in terms of what I'm working on, I've been fascinated with the Reconstruction era, and then this idea called the Redemption era. I hate that term because it sounds good when it really refers to the Southern. They were Democrats back then, but we'll call them the Southern conservatives, retaking and stripping power that emancipated slaves Black Americans had achieved to regain control and establish Jim Crow. I've been fascinated with that transition from Reconstruction to quote unquote redemption, and the idea of this all stemmed from this idea of Indiana Jones combating the Nazis. And I'm like, that's all well and good, but we've had enough of that. What happens if a person of color, what happens if a Black American, has to journey forth through hostile territory, unencumbered for the moment with this idea of slavery, but still dealing with the after effects, the lingering after effects of slavery as he tries to accomplish something. A, what would he be trying to accomplish? And B, who would stand and oppose him? And so there's this idea of a hero who is trying to reconnect slave families torn apart during this era, as you get the rise of both, the Southern conservatives working towards redemption and this rise of the Ku Klux Klan in 1865, 1866. And so it's just a hodgepodge of me looking at all this racism and how this character deals with it. But it's fun, it's infuriating, especially in the time that we're dealing with now. We are doing this for Juneteenth. But it is fun to explore and see what could have been had it not been stolen away.
And I love it. I'm so excited.
I already wanted. Where's the pre-order link? Like, how do I like right now?
Kwame's trying to mix something. When Kwame's mixing something and when something irritates Kwame, it comes out on the page in such a dynamic and forceful and wonderful way that is life affirming for Black children. And so
Thank you.
I will stand Kwame and Mbalia forever, because I really do believe that when you chew on something for these Black children, you make it gold, and you make them fall in love with it. All while,
I will second that.
You know what I mean? All while imparting like pride for being a Black child, and pride for the history, and hope. And I think that is part of our mission as Black content creators for our people and our children is those things.
But what about you?
What was I supposed to say? I don't know.
Well, okay, so we switched it. You will, in talking on what you can say that you're working on, but just some advice, in world building and writing for aspiring authors, followed by what you're doing.
Okay, so I'll do the advice thing just like Kwame did. I think that tether yourself to something true. Find something in your world that you can hold on to that's true. For me, for the Bells, it was this interrogation of beauty and power. And I think that when you find something that fascinates you, that you want to chew on in your world, it makes your world building fun. It makes you, everything you consume, you find a way to like build into your infrastructure. So find something that really bothers you, something you want to talk about, something you want to chew on, and then fill up your well with that and populate your world with those things that interest you, because it's really hard to do the writing, as Kwame was talking about. It's writing, it's rewriting, it's rebuilding, it's tearing it down, it's starting over again. And when the core is something true, something that bothers you, you'll stay for the revisions and you'll push through. So that would be my advice for when you're building these worlds, whether they're portal, layered, or secondary world fantasies. What I'm working on. Oh, Jesus, I'm working on a lot of things.
What can you talk about? Because I know how publishing be.
Right, I got a lot of secret projects. Well, Elle and I have a series that launches in the fall with, kicks off the Mirror Project with Disney.
Yes.
First one is Julie Dow's Broken Wish. Mine is Shattered Midnight, which comes next year. And then is Jen Cervantes, and then Elle. And it is set in 1928 New Orleans. And it follows a Black girl who is a wonderful jazz musician. And she's got a big secret. And she's trying to figure out what to do and how to make it through. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm also wrestling with an adult book. I'm writing for blasphemous adults. It's really difficult. And I'm reading, and again, it's another one. It's why I was in New Orleans for a while. It's why I'm going to New Orleans in the fall. It's set there. And I'm chewing sort of on a big question of, are we destined to become our parents? Am I destined to become my mother? And what happens when your mother's a villain? And I wanted to talk about and confront this idea as a content creator that I'm afraid to write Black women as villains, to allow them to have power and take it to a dark place, because the representation of Black women in media is already not so great, and we're still working on that. But I want to talk about how we can also have heroes, anti-heroes, villains, and sort of have a complex conversation about power, privilege, and the methods, right? So that's what I'm chewing on. Yeah, and magic.
Well, I need that pre-order link as well. I mean, I know I'm gonna get the one for the Mirror because I have to get it. But I also want the other one too.
Well, I will send it to you to read. I'm also send it to Kwame, because I send Kwame a lot of stuff where I'm like, tell me what's wrong with this. So, and he does. He'll be like, yo, you need to cut right here. You're dragging right here. Cut it. But yeah, I'm just lucky that I get to be with you all in fantasy. And I just want all the Black fantasy from the two of you, because I wish when I was a young reader that I had the two of you. My imagination would be different. It would be forever.
I'm glad that the kids have the Bells and Tristan Strong. I have physically seen, my babies don't read my books, first of all. But I have seen the effect that having these stories has on them versus what the lack did to me and to others who grew up. So I want to thank you both again for joining me in this Juneteenth panel. It has been amazing. Dhonielle and Kwame, guys, go out and get their books. I'm telling you, do it for the babies and do it for yourself as well, because it was a treat for me to read before he ran off with it. So y'all be good, and we'll see you on another panel. Bye.